Hello everyone, Mimi here, presenting to you the auto-aiming machine gun Deadeye. This is basically a Barrage Deadeye with a Hydrosphere, which allows you to clear maps as well as do bosses with just one skill. Originally, Hydrosphere was not in the equation of this build. However, this ball is so important to the build that it probably accounts for more than half of our DPS on bosses, as well as enabling our high mapping speed. The reason why I decided to include Hydrosphere is I realized that most of the bolt builds uses two skills, one for mapping and one for bossing. Not exactly fun enough for me to grind on it for a long period of time, because no matter what kind of skill combination you choose, it's always one skill for clearing and one skill for bossing. They all kind of feel the same. I want at least some sort of unique perks to the build, because the best part that I like about this game is creating a build that you don't know if it's gonna work or not, but it sounds kinda fun and it looks plausible on POE, and then actually creating one to see how far I can go with it. So I theory crafted, did some experiments and refined on it with my limited budget, and I ended up with this version of the build. What it does is making Barrage auto-aiming to the target so none of the shot would end up hitting nothing, which is the main reason why Barrage cannot be a mapping skill. And this is achieved with Chain and Hydrosphere. If you don't already know, you probably do, but for those of you who don't know, what happens is when Barrage projectile hits the Hydrosphere, it can be used as a target to chain your arrows. And when it starts to chain, it will target something that is targetable within the range, therefore auto-aiming. And with the Ricochet Ascendancy and the Chain Support gem, as long as we are hitting the ball, we will be hitting just about everything in sight. Even if it doesn't, usually it will hit the wall or a terrain, and Ricochet has a chance to make the projectile chain off the terrain again, which further increases the chance of our Barrage to hit a target, if there are any left. And with this string of passive skills, our chain range is increased by 30%, which means we can do something like shooting towards the complete opposite direction and still hits the target with increased damage. Pretty hilarious. We can also bend the bullets like in the movies and shoot the targets on the other side of the obstacle like this. And the fun doesn't end here. Since we also have King of the Hill passive, we knock back enemies when we crit. And because we fire 11 projectiles in a sequence, thanks to the +2 projectile from our bow, the Dying Sun pots, and another of our ascendancy points, if there is only one target, there will most likely be knocked back at least 9 times per use of Barrage, because our effective crit chance is around 90%. And on top of that, if we put the sniper's mark on the enemy, each projectile will first chain off the Hydrosphere, hit the target, split into 4 different projectiles, and 1/3 of those projectiles are gonna chain off the wall and hit the target again. This repeats 11 times per one Barrage, which happens about 3 to 4 times a second. So that is like 50 knockbacks per second. That is a lot of knockback. So what ends up happening is the boss will usually be pushed way off the screen when we open fire, which is great for our far shot ascendancy, and also for our safety, because half of the time when that happens, the boss will be aggroed to our ice golem instead of us. Now, far shot also conveniently solves one of our problem with the Barrage Hydrosphere combo, and that is making Barrage shots with no spread. So 100% of our Barrage shot are hitting the Hydrosphere. The other problem we have to solve for this combo to work is creating the Hydrosphere itself. Because having to cast Hydrosphere every time we use Barrage is way too clunky to play, and it's not gonna happen. So we have to use Asenath's Chance Helmet, which allows us to move the ball at exactly where we aim at. And this is basically how this build functions at its core. Now we build on it. We start off at our damage source by looking at our gears first. What I use is your typical deck stacking bow quiver combo, with cold damage per 10 decks on both of them. Hyri's Demise is probably your best quiver choice, and it's not exactly too expensive at around 10 to 20 C each. Our bow though is the most expensive part of our gear. because a good majority of the bow builds uses this kind of bow. You are looking for additional arrows and cold damage per 10 dex Imperial bow as your baseline. The cheapest bow of any kind with these two lines are around 1 to 3x. But the good news is, as long as you have these two lines, your damage usually won't have too much of a difference until you get ones like mine or better. To give you a perspective, this is my previous bow that I made, which is pretty similar to my current one, except it has like 100 less cold damage, and the DPS difference is only about 10%. But I paid around 15x for my old bow, and my current one is like 30 plus x. However, my first bow was very cheap, and it was more than enough to get this build started. It was something similar to this one except with a 4+2 link, and that bow only cost me around 4 TC. And for this build, you only need 1 6 link to work, which I will get into later. So with a tabula, a 4 link on my bow was not a problem for my progression at all. And it was more than enough to get me through to around T10 maps. Just remember, do not get Pierce at all. Pierce will pretty much destroy this build. Now, if you do have the extra resource and you're looking for a better bow, for prefix you should look for cold damage per 10 dex, at least T3 flat cold damage, and +1 socketed gem. Note that +1 gem is better than +2 bow gem because +1 gem affects all 6 gems on the bow, while +2 gem only affects 1 gem for our links here. For suffix, you want 2 additional arrows, attack speed, and either double damage or any of the crits. Next up we have the helmet. The Asenath Chant is a hard required unique helmet. This is the core of what makes this build work, so unfortunately we can't pick up a better helmet like the Fractural Thoughts or a stronger rare helmet. Yes, there is a crafted mod on weapon that allows you to trigger a spell after using a skill, but that mod has a 4-second internal cooldown, which is just as bad as casting it ourselves, so we're not gonna take that. With body armor, 6-link Hyrus Ire is probably the strongest 6-link armor for this build that only costs around 2 to 3x. Every single line on it are exactly what we need on a chest piece. However, you definitely can craft a better chest piece, maybe Explode mod or something like that, but that is gonna cost way too much for our budget. And then we have our gloves. Really simple, a grip glove base with life and resistance. That's it. You can definitely get a better glove, like having extra frenzy charges or something like that. The glove is one of the gear slot that is easier to improve for this current build. For our boots, we need to get this Storm Rider base boot because it gives us lightning damage if we stack accuracy. Now, a bow build usually have a lot of accuracy naturally, especially if you stack a little bit of dex. So this shoes actually contributes quite a bit of damage for us. Later on when we talk about passive skills and buffs, you will see how this all falls together really nicely. Just put your usual resistance, life, and movement speed on it and you're done for the shoes. I crafted this cannot be chilled mod because the main weakness of this build is low health pool. Since we are relying on moving around to dodge damage, so any kind of speed reduction can cause some problem for us. Therefore I choose this crafted mod so there are less situations that will slow me down. Next up we have a replica Hyrus Truth Amulet. The main selling point of this amulet is the level 22 hatred that only costs 25% mana reserve. And it's only 50c each, so not too expensive. All other stats on it are also really good for us, so with my limited Path of Exile knowledge, I can't really think of a better amulet for this build at the moment. For our ring slots, we have Double Taming Prismatic Ring. It gives us a lot of resistance and a lot of damage at the same time. None of the stats on it are wasted, and they cost around 60c to 1x each. I would like to get a rare ring though because I do need more HP. But rare rings that gives similar stats are usually a lot more expensive than this. And most of my currency were used up on my bow, so this is my budget choice. You can just get any ring that fixes your resistance when you are just progressing. And then finally we have the belt. I use a Cyclopean coil because it gives us a lot of life and a lot of int and strength, which we desperately need. And also it gives us freeze immunity. Since we are kind of a glass cannon, so freeze usually means insta-death for us. And having this belt means we don't need a freeze immunity pot, so we can have an extra pot for more damage. And also, it is very cheap. You can find hundreds of them for 1 chaos each. Now we move on to the passive skill tree. There are 4 required unique gems: a medium ring Thread of Hope, a large ring Thread of Hope, a Lion Eyes Fall, which are all around 10 chaos each, and finally a volley shot, which is like 1 chaos. The medium Thread of Hope goes in here, which allows us to grab the 20 strength notable here, 8% life here, endurance charge and frenzy charge notables here, saving us about 13 passive skill points. Pretty insane value. The large ring Thread of Hope goes in here, which allows us to grab Master of Fletcher, King of the Hill, and this Adder's Touch notable here. Adder's Touch is a dagger's passive, but we turns it into super strong bow passive using Lion Eyes Fall on this spot. By doing so, it also allows us to grab these claw passives and these dagger passives as bow passives as well, which all adds a huge amount of damage to the bow skills. And then the last gem, Volley Fire, we put it here. For keystones, we take the Double Dodge, Wind Dancer, Valpak, and Point Blank. Point Blank and Far Shot does the complete opposite thing, but after some research and testing, I concluded that having both of them together is actually still beneficial for us in most situations. The optimal range for this combination is from your character to the edge of the screen, which is around 70 units. That is when this combo provides the maximum damage. So just remember, roughly speaking, you do the most damage when you can't see the enemy. After that, we need to take these int notables here, here, and here. And then the strength notables here and here. Oh yeah, not to forget, if you do not have the Claw Leech notable yet, you need to get this leeching passives here for your sustain, which should be enough to max your leech per second for both your life and mana with the amount of damage you do. And then we need to get this string of chain related passives all the way to trick shot, since our build has heavy emphasis on chain mechanic. And of course, we need to get as much life as possible, so we have some life here, 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 and then here and here. And finally, we have the rest of our damage passives. We are mainly scaling cold damage, so we have these 2 cold circles here and here for cold damage conversion and penetration. We have our crits here and here. And then we already have these crits while getting our intelligence stats up here. We already talked about the dagger and claw passives using the Lion's Eyes for here, which gives us a whole lot of damage as well. And then we get the Primeval Force for our Amulet Anointment, which gives us like 10% extra total damage. Pretty huge. Now this is a level 89 tree. If somehow you leveled it to 100 like a madman, you should get Mark of Death over here for a huge bossing DPS boost with Culling Strike. The next 2 notables that boost the most damage for us with the 6 skill points left are Farsight followed by Acuity here. The accuracy in these circles are actually boosting our damage as well, thanks to our boots. Otherwise, you can add more life or anything of your choice. Okay, let's talk about our skill links. Hydrosphere. And yes, there are even more reasons to use Hydrosphere in this build than simply enabling auto-aiming. We use Elemental Proliferation so it freezes everything around it, which greatly increases our survivability. It will also amplify our damage by shocking everything while applying cold and lightning exposure for us as the icing on the cake. The second support gem here is Power Charge on hit because I couldn't figure out a better gem that is more helpful than this. The fourth gem here is actually War Banner because this is the only spot that I can find to fit the banner in. It gives us more accuracy that can turn into more damage, and then it gives us adrenaline when we place a banner for our bossing burst DPS. Then we have our main 6-link Barrage with elemental damage with the tag and damage on full life, inspiration, chain, and hypothermia. This will give you the maximum mapping speed, and if you want more bossing damage, swap out chain for cold penetration and you will instantly gain about 30% more damage on bosses. However, if you are doing T16 maps or below without insane map modifiers, you should have enough damage to do most bosses fairly comfortably without the gem swap. If you do happen to have the +1 gem skill level on your bow, remember to put this link on the weapon. Otherwise, it could be on your chest piece if that's the only 6-link you have for the time being. And to support that, we have our 5-link Frenzy. Now we do use Frenzy as a second skill, but this skill is only a support skill, not for damage. It is used to create your Frenzy charges, inspiration charges, a little bit of power charges if there are enemies around, and also I've put Calling Strike on it to kill those more tanky bosses easier. We do have Mark for Death passive for Calling Strike against marked enemy, but in the heat of the fight, you're not gonna always guarantee that the boss is marked, so having a second Calling Strike is surprisingly useful. Of course, if you have gears that marks the boss on hit, you don't even need this. You can put whatever you want here. And then I put Chain on it so that it is easier for Frenzy to actually hit the boss when there are mobs around. The 6th slot on this link is where I fit my Sniper's Mark. And yes, I have to self-cast the mark because I can't afford better gear. But as you can see, it's a 5-link or even a 4-link realistically, so there are quite a bit of room for your customization. Next up, a 2-link setup with my Dash, Second Wind combo and Herald of Eyes plus Precision Aura. Herald of Eyes gives us more clear power and Precision gives us more crit and accuracy that we can turn into those sweet damage again. Just have to be aware that don't link these two together, otherwise both of your auras will reserve extra mana because of Second Wind support. And then finally I'll cast on damage taken. I put Ice Golem, Immortal Coal, and Withering Step. Nothing crazy here. Finally, Flasks. I have a HP Flask with Bleed Immunity. Diamond Flask with Bleed Immunity again because if you do have the budget to get a Bottle of Faith, you can swap out the HP pot and not lose the Bleed Immunity. And we don't need to worry about freeze because of our belt. And then we have Dying Sun for more projectiles, Aziri's Promise for more damage, and then finally Cinder Swallow for damage, sustain, and movement speed. Yes, I do use it as a Quicksilver Flask sometimes, bite me. And finally, I'm gonna show you some more clips of me doing maps, mostly T15 or T16 maps, with some regular mods, and there are no serious fights because I'm still struggling to learn when and how to dodge its attacks. But overall, this character feels really good for most of the stuff. For example, it is very easy to do blights. What I do is making all the towers into summons, and then I stand right next to the pump, open the minimap, and just shoot at the general direction of the closest red dot, and everything will just melt. And if there are chokes like when you are doing heists, if the choke is small enough, your bow will actually block off the choke completely, so none of the mob can physically pass through. And you literally just have to shoot at the choke and everything, including the mobs on your side of the choke, will all disappear very quickly. I've bought the Arcane Barrage skin because without it, you can't really see where the projectile is going, which is like most of the fun for this build. Now I do have to mention the weak side of this build because this is far from a perfect build. The thing I struggle with the most is proximity shield and anything that restrict your movement. For example, those tangling vines that you have to move around slowly for a while to break free, or maybe silence or mana drain that stops me from using dash. These kind of things are by far the most common cause of my death over anything else, because this build is naturally low on life from not having enough currency invested into it, but you do learn to deal with them after time, so it's not the end of the world. Of course, you can always put more exile into the build to give you more room for error. You can do something like adding 1 large cluster jewel and 3 Watcher's Eye by swapping out the claw and dagger rings. By doing so, I can have about 300 more HP and almost double the damage. The rings, chest piece and gloves can all be upgraded with better rare gears by putting something like frenzy charges, dex, and more life while maintaining enough resistance. They sound extremely expensive, and they are extremely expensive, but no worry, because one of the things I found out about this build is that no matter what stage of progression I was in, I was always geared enough to be able to do content that makes me enough currency for the next upgrade with reasonable time. It is pretty fun and comfortable to grind with as well. Right now I can definitely see myself making enough exiles for those next upgrades using my current gear. Except I probably don't have enough time, so I'm probably just gonna call it a finished character for now. My current set of gear is mostly unique, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem for regular players to reach this stage. The main thing that is expensive is just the bow, but again, if you put in those 2 lines into the trait search, cold damage per 10 dex and additional arrow, there should be many cheap options that you can grab within 1 or 2 exiles. Anyways, that's it for today. Subscribe and like for extra mirror drop chance. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.